Okay, I welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is an audio and video show where we interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. On each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative manner. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized, imagined, and narrated by the guest on our show. After doing this podcast for about 80 episodes, I realized that one of the most important reasons I really started this podcast was to play a small part in maybe creating a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet, where we hold space for each other and where we slowly start to appreciate the years of effort, love, sacrifice, and dedication that it takes to build a career in any field. So today's guest is someone whose writing has brought me a lot of joy and plenty of laughs too. So our guest today is Amrita Singh, and a little bit about her before we jump into this conversation. So Amrita is a neuroscientist. She earned a PhD from Johns Hopkins University in 2023 and currently works as a clinical research scientist. She has always been interested in writing. She runs a blog called Learning to Be Happy, where she writes about various topics of interest, including, but not limited to, popular science and mental health. She's also working on writing fiction. Since April 2023, she has volunteered for CEGIS, or if I hope I'm saying that right, which is an organization that aims to improve the governance of Indian states. She loves playing board games, singing, and dabbling in all kinds of art. I will be linking Amrita's Substack and her wonderful Instagram art account in the show notes that I highly recommend you review once we are done with this conversation. So, Amrita, thank you for making time for this. I know we're speaking from two different corners of the world, India and the US, and I appreciate you adjusting your schedule to do this. But yeah, I mean, the first question I wanted to ask you, you are a neuroscientist today. Um, as an educator myself, one of the first things I think about is what was this person like as a child? What were some things they thought about growing up? So, because you're so closely involved with this world of science, how has your perspective on science as a subject changed from your time as a student at school to now being a professional scientist?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And thanks a lot for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, I can't believe you found my Instagram art account because I think, I don't know when is the last time I posted there. It's some like old thing. But anyway, yeah, very excited to be here. And yeah, so when I was a child, I sort of wanted to be a scientist from a very young age. And that's because my parents are both scientists. And I grew up in a research institute in India, TIFR in Mumbai. My dad worked there, and I was basically surrounded by scientists. A lot of all my friends' parents were scientists. The whole sort of zeitgeist was about science and research, and so it was almost like a default thing for me that when I grow up, I'll become a scientist because that seemed like the most interesting and like worthwhile career to have. And we had lots of exposure to science itself. Like I remember one of my friend's moms, she is a neuroscientist, Vidita Vaidya. We would, she was friends with our parents. And so one day she just took us to her lab to sort of show us what happens in a neuroscience lab. And I don't remember anything about the science that she told me, but I saw on a whiteboard in the lab, uh, there was a message for someone called Amrita, who was some, postdoc working in her lab. And it said, Amrita, the rat brains are in the fridge on a whiteboard. And I remember being very tickled by that. And, so a lot of salient childhood memories just attached to the people that do science and, attending like lectures and people would organize like science for kids and, So yeah, huge exposure as a child, and I was very privileged to have that environment growing up. And so I think my childhood perspective of science was a little bit rosy-eyed, right? Like it was all about the things that work well in science and the big discoveries, and like Einstein and Newton and all these great things that we know. And um, then I went to college and continued to be fascinated by my focus. Shrunk a little bit. Earlier, it was just science in general. Then I became much more interested in biology. Then specifically in the biology of the brain, which is neuroscience. But still with a very sort of rose-tinted glasses kind of view of it. I would read these papers making some claims and be really fascinated by it. And I remember that I would read the introduction section of a research paper, and I would really take it at face value. And now I know that people are incentivized by the system of academia to sort of write grandiose statements in the introduction about how their experiments are revealing some fundamental truths about human nature and cognition and stuff. And in reality, most studies that are published out there don't really contribute to our understanding in a very fundamental way. Like I was recently reading a very interesting article about this is about the field of psychology, but I think it also applies to a large extent to neuroscience, which is that if you just delete some 20% of research papers that are out there, you somehow they turn out to be wrong, or we say that we no longer, let's pretend that we didn't have that research done. It doesn't fundamentally change the understanding of the field, which is a very, it's a profound statement which tells you that a lot of individual research articles, either because they are not reproducible or because they're very, like they apply to a very niche context, they don't address these sort of fundamental questions in a way that pushes forward our understanding. So as I've grown up and, gone through the process of what it actually means to do a scientific experiment in a lab and to write a paper and, publish a paper, and gone through all of these processes that are the science itself, I've become a lot more skeptical. And I think, in some ways, there's some jaded feeling that I have now, which is, I look at a paper and my sort of default assumption is that it's probably wrong rather than it's probably right. And some of that skepticism is healthy because it helps you to, come to things with a critical eye and find errors. But it also, in some ways, has reduced my excitement to do science itself in the traditional academic setting. And I think a lot of this has to do with the modern world and sort of the incentives that we give to scientists, so there's a lot of pressure to publish papers for any individual scientist. And that is, it's just cause and effect. You put pressure to publish papers, you'll get papers that probably shouldn't have been published, in the sense that they either, don't add much, or they are too they're like, yeah, basically there are some issues, the statistics are incorrect, there's like, quality control problems, and it's not the fault of the people doing the science, in my opinion. I think we need to, really restructure the way academia works and the way we, as a society, we approach science. And like, how do we want to, what kind of incentives do we want to put in place to actually make scientific progress as a society? These are not easy questions, and I don't have any solution that, like, here's a system that's much better than the existing system. But yeah, it's sort of like having seen how the sausage is made, really seeing the system from the inside. I now understand some problems with the way that science is conducted, and I'm a lot less, just willing to believe something that a scientist says. Whereas in my childhood, it was kind of like, of course, scientists are correct about everything. And yeah, that, uh, yeah, that's sort of how I've changed.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on, you addressed a lot of different aspects, and because as someone that was really embedded in that world of academia, I think some of your observations are so important, especially for someone that is potentially looking at this as a career option, in the long term. I think it's not as rosy as it's put out to be. There are so many challenges in the long term that you have to navigate, even once you get past the basic criteria to be a scientist, which is often very much harder than so many other professions where you need advanced qualifications to even enter the door and be able to do science in a particular way. So, you know, and I think it's also the way the general audience thinks about science. We listen to the big stories, the big achievements, but we don't realize how many years and decades of effort and so many unknown scientists and names contributed bits and bits of pieces that actually added up to that becoming sort of a reality. And I think the scientific method in a lot of ways, and this is something I struggled with as a teacher when I taught grade 5 for 2 years, and it was in the
Okay.
Canadian sort of public school system. And I started thinking about my responsibility as an educator at this point with regards to how can I communicate the best ideas of this subject in a way that is both accessible, accurate, and engaging. There was a pressure, even as an educator at that point, to push the kids through the curriculum, maybe without giving them a strong fundamental understanding of why these things were important. And I noticed a lot of
Hmm.
them struggling, because there was so much pressure on us as educators to make sure they finished all the assessments on time that sometimes they didn't understand a fundamental concept, and we were testing them on a more advanced concept and
Right.
judging them on it. And it became sort of a recurring cycle where over time you constantly judge them on their advanced understanding when their fundamentals are sort of broken, in terms of a basic sort of view of what this subject can do. And I also speak from personal experience as a student. Like when I grew up, I think the environment that I grew up in was highly sort of motivated to look at science as a way to succeed in life financially rather than actually
Hmm.
contribute to society. So get into the right colleges, compete in the right exams. So I think that changed my perspective significantly. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we look at those world views. But I wanted to show you something. You may recognize this, Amrita. This is the
Yeah, of course.
I got it.
This
I remember.
was
Sorry.
this used to sit under my monitor at my desk to raise the height of the monitor for many years. That was how it was used.
But yeah, this was my only connection to neuroscience. I read Eric Kandel's memoir and then found this book
Uh-huh.
in like a secondhand sale when I had visited New York briefly, and I had to pay extra to bring it back in my luggage because it's, as you can see,
Yep.
extremely huge, and
Uh-huh.
some of it is inaccessible to me. But for me, it's almost as beautiful as a piece of art in my house, in some way. But
Uh-huh.
Amrita, I wanted to, double down on that world of growing up, within sort of a higher education institute. And, TIFR,
Hmm.
for the people that are listening in, is the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, which is one of the premier scientific research institutions in India. So you were surrounded by scientists, but for parents and other young people listening to this, if they want to engage with science and access science, especially when they're at school or early on in their academic careers at the bachelor's or the master's, how do you continue to stay excited about the developments in the field, um, not just as a scientist but as someone curious about the field, just starting off learning about it?
Yeah. Um, that I mean, what a lot of what you were saying about just when you're teaching, having to like do a syllabus rather than teach the fundamental principles, like what is the scientific method, what does it mean, and why should you believe something that is in a science textbook versus like some any other claim made by someone. I think those are so important, and I wish that we were able to, as a society, give that to more of our children. And I think we do a very bad job, like the school system. The way I've seen it as well, I had this very privileged home environment where I was getting that, but school was really not giving that to us or to any of my friends around me, and it's very sad. And so I think that as parents, if you want to sort of give your child appreciation for science that goes beyond getting good marks in the exams, I think that is actually very important to sort of let go of that marks part of it. Because I feel like a lot of children in school create a very negative association with science because it's difficult. And the reason it's difficult is because they don't understand the fundamentals, right? So if, in fifth standard, you learn some, I don't know, very basic math and you don't understand it. And then in eighth standard, you're being told about Newton's laws of motion. You develop this very negative emotional association with Newton's laws of motion because you don't have the math in place to understand that. And then you're being tested on it and you have to mug it up and write down what the equation is and what it means, but you just, you can't. And so I wish for parents to let that go and not tell their kids that you must do well in the school tests, so that we can start at least from a place of, okay, we don't have to do anything. Maybe we want to do something, maybe we don't. That's fine. But if we feel interested about it, then let's sort of explore this with curiosity. Right. And then I think that kids, especially young kids, like you don't need to push them to be curious about things. Kids are so, excited to learn and explore the world, and so then you just need to sort of provide some resources that you allow kids to explore by themselves. And I think that there are tons of good children's science books out there. I don't like have a list off the top of my head, but maybe after the podcast I can do some searching and give you like some of the books that I read when I was a child, especially for for college age children. I know a lot of good popular science books, that some of which I can even recommend. One example I think is Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene. I think a certain age, like maybe certainly undergrads can read it, maybe even like a 15-year-old who has some interest in biology. It's really well written. And it gives you this sort of very deep excitement for like basic biology concepts and like what it means, that I think is very like will push any curious child into the right path. And so yeah, and for younger kids I think there's a lot of good books, TV shows, etc. out there. Can't tell you any off the top of my head, but yeah, I would say don't put pressure to do well in tests and provide interesting material. Kids will take it from there. That's my feeling. I obviously have not done this myself. I haven't raised a child, but yeah, that's how I imagine it will go.
Yeah, I think those are some really good recommendations. And do you feel like libraries or museums, or in Bombay we have science centers, do these community spaces play like an important role in creating that sort of environment, or can they do that?
I would say I think that they maybe, but I feel like the amount of exposure that you can get from libraries and museums is sort of not enough. Like I think you need to have those resources at home, and especially like these days with the internet and all, it's possible to have that at home. You sort of don't even need to spend money really if you try, like if you're a little resourceful, you can find free stuff on the internet that's really good. And I would say like if you can do the libraries and museums, like that's great. Like I remember going to Nehru Planetarium in Mumbai as a child, and it was very, very interesting to see that they have this dome with all the stars, and they like give you a lecture about like all the different constellations and stuff like that. And that's great. That definitely is going to inspire curiosity in kids. But I think that that's going to be few and far between. Even if you do go to many museums and all that, that's not enough in my view. I think you need to have books or like online material at home, easily accessible for kids. Encourage them to just read and learn, and be curious about it, and don't make it a thing that they have to do. Make it a thing that they can do if they want to. And I think that a lot of kids will choose to. So yeah.
And like in t- in terms of your, like you mentioned reading, and I know it's not just science that you enjoy reading. You read in
Oh
a
no. Yeah.
like a wide variety. So if
Yeah.
if you could and if you could briefly tell me about your journey with books, from a young age, do you, off the top of your mind, remember the first books that got you excited about reading fiction and nonfiction? And then, how do you, and this is something I struggle with, how do you stay excited about reading as an adult, when there's
Hmm.
so much information coming in? And I will link Amrita's brilliant piece about the content deluge sort of this media heavy world that we're all embedded in. So yeah, a little bit about your journey as a reader and how do you continue to stay excited about it today?
So yeah, I read voraciously as a kid. Again, I was extremely privileged to have parents who could both afford to buy books for me and afford a library membership, and wanted and encouraged it. And this was sort of the perpetual complaint of my grandparents. Like, we would be sitting and eating lunch together, and I would have my nose in a book, and they would be like, she doesn't talk to us, always reading. So now looking back on it, I think I wish I had talked to my grandparents a little more and read a little less, like in front of them. But anyway, that's a random tangent. So yeah, I started reading when I was very young with those, picture books and those like I think they're called Little Reader, ages 1 to 4. They have like some levels. I remember those also. I have some of them, in my parents' house, like all these books that I read when I was very young, like I think 5 years, 6 years. And then what I really remember getting into at a slightly older age is Enid Blyton. Everything. So whatever I could get my hands on, like Famous Five, Secret Seven, Five Find Outers, the Faraway Tree series, like just everything. The school stuff that she has some 2, 3 series that are set in um, girls' boarding schools in England. And it's not clear why that should be relatable for, a child growing up in Mumbai. It's a totally different world, but something about the way she wrote, like it was so exciting. They would go on these midnight feasts where they would like have gathered up food over 1 week from their mess, and then they would put it all in a sack and then go and have it at midnight. And that was fascinating for some reason. So yeah, a lot of that. And then at some point started reading Harry Potter, and I think that was huge. I was obsessed with it as a child. I could tell you all the details. Like, my friends and I remember we used to do these Harry Potter quizzes. We would just ask each other the most obscure questions about like details from the books, and that was so much fun. Like, that was our way of doing something fun in the evening when or in the school bus or something like that. So it was a huge obsession. And I actually found, like, even as an adult, I reread some of the Harry Potter books. And I found that I still really loved them. Like, something about the characters, the way they're written. You love those people and you really care what happens to them. And I find that that's actually rare in fiction, these days, that I develop an emotional bond with a character and I really care that something good happens to them, something bad doesn't happen. So whenever an author is able to do that, I sort of give them, I feel like that's well written. Um, and yeah, so that was childhood, and then slowly started picking up more diverse types of books. Science fiction. I remember there's a book called A Wrinkle in Time, which recently was made into a movie. Also, it's science fiction, and someone gifted that to me when I was I think 12, 13 years old, and I fell in love with it, read it a lot. Then another book called Journey to the River Sea, which was about a girl who is moved to live with some parents in the Amazon rainforest. And it was my first sort of exposure to that whole world and the concept of like, oh, what is a rainforest? What is the Amazon? And I was fascinated by that. So yeah, lots of different children's fiction. And I was a member of this library in Mumbai where I used to go, and I think you had to pay some 5 rupees per book. So every week we would go there and I would pick up like some 10 books, go home with it, read all of them, come back the next week, another 10, like that. It was, good time. Um, and now as an adult, I think in college, reading took a serious hit. I don't think I read maybe cumulative like 5 fiction books in college. And I was reading some non-fiction more, like popular science kind of stuff. But reading definitely took a hit also during my PhD. And then at some point, I found audiobooks and started listening to audiobooks like while working in the lab and things like that. And that sort of got me back into the world where, okay, now again, I'm excited about a book and I can't, I'm going to finish it even if it's 3 a.m. And that hadn't happened. There was like a gap of 10 years where that hadn't happened. And then I found that again in my like late 20s through audiobooks. And it was very big for me because, that joy of reading a good book and you don't want to put it down and you just want to do that. It's so special and it gives you this, it's, no Instagram reel or movie or anything can ever, I think, like give you that kind of satisfaction that you get from the world of a good book. Yeah, but I think as an adult, it is harder. Like it's not as effortless as it is as a child. There's so many things sort of pulling our attention in different directions, and also responsibilities, right? Like you have to take care of yourself as an adult. You're providing your own meals, you have to get exercise. As a kid, you sort of just exist in the world and all that is taken care of for you. So if you're reading, you don't have, whatever. But now I think because we have this layer of responsibility of living well in some sense, and then of course our jobs and everything, it's harder to just sort of let go and be like, yeah, like whatever, the world will go on, I will read. So then I think it becomes a little bit more effortful. And so for example, right now I'm reading For Whom the Bell Tolls, Ernest Hemingway. Very good book, but I'm not just getting lost in it. Like I find myself, one day I'll read 20 pages, next day I'll read 10 pages, 5 pages, then one day I'll read 50 pages. And I keep updating on Goodreads that I'm making progress because that helps me to sort of keep going back to it. So in that sense, it's not the same relationship to reading at all as I had as a child. Like I would probably have finished this book of this length in like 3 days as a child, which is not happening now. It's more effortful. But the joy is still there. So, sometimes I'll land on a book, even as an adult, where like I can't not finish this book now. It's okay if I don't exercise one day. And one example of a book that I read like this as an adult is Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So that was like fantasy for adults that I really loved. A lot of fantasy for adults, I think, doesn't really hit the mark, but this one was great. It did that thing where it got me to care so much about the main character that it was almost like a friend, and like you want to know what happens to them. Yeah, so those sort of can't put down books are fewer, rarer, I think, as an adult. But and it's okay, in my opinion, to try to read, and to make it an effort to like count the number of books you read every year as a goal. Like that helps me to read. And I think some people feel like, don't turn it into a chore. Like, why are you doing that? But I feel like it's a good goal to have. It's very good to read. Like I know that I am a better thinker, writer, just person when I'm reading more. So it's fine. I think, it doesn't have to be effortless.
Yeah, because I think people have a lot of different thoughts about, the idea of, creating goals at the end of the year, about discovering or reading the classics. And I feel like I'm on the same page about that. I feel like everyone is their own kind of reader, and it really depends on what stage of your life you are at as well. Sometimes maybe you're just going to read a certain kind of fiction. Sometimes it just could be nonfiction, and um, yeah, and for some reason, this particular author, Patrick Rothfuss, I know he's written
Hmm.
only 2 or 3 books, right? Not too many in his.
So,
In,
yeah, he's written 2 books in the main series, and then he's written a bunch of spin-off things like novellas and short stories. Um,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, because that name has somehow popped up in a couple of things I've listened to, or so maybe it's a sign that I should, pick it up. But what
Yeah.
about your book discovery process, Amrita? Like for me, I've it's just a fun thing for me personally. Like more recently, it's like this. I pick up books that I'm emotionally curious about, if it's
Hmm.
fiction, So there was this book I read recently called Remarkably Bright Creatures. It's by this author called Shelby Van Pelt, and it's about an 80-year-old caretaker in a aquarium and a bond she develops with an octopus that is in that aquarium. And I thought, wow, this is different. I'm curious, how are these two people talking and communicating with each other? Similarly, another book I picked up was Elif Shafak's The 40 Rules of Love. And I hadn't read anything by her, but this was about two mystics that stayed in a particular part of Turkey in the 1200s or 1300s and about their worldview. So it also opened up this entire world of a particular religion to me. So
Mm.
this was how I entered those worlds. I was curious about it, and that was my entry point. Like, if you could tell me about the story of like 2 or 3 audiobooks or physical books that you picked up that you stumbled upon through, layers of curiosity rather than
Mm.
actually being recommended it, like you went to a bookshop, you heard like a podcast, or I don't know, like what, like I'm just curious, how do you discover books and still have it be spontaneous in a way? Like,
Yeah. So I mean, I think a lot of the books I read are coming from recommendations, and over time, you as an adult, you also develop a like you trust some people to recommend things that you like, and you sort of learn that okay, these recommendations like I'm not going to like even if someone says that they just loved it and all that. Like you sample a few books from a wide variety of sources of recommendations and you start curating. So, for example, I'm part of this writing group, and I know that uh, people from that group, when they recommend stuff, like I like those books. So, that's a big part of the like discovery process. But let me see a book that I picked up. So there's this graphic novel called Persepolis. It is about a young girl. It's a true story, actually, autobiographical, about a girl growing up in Iran during the revolution, and then she leaves Iran, goes to France. It's a graphic novel. It is beautifully illustrated, beautifully written. I highly recommend it. And this is one book that I clearly remember seeing in a book shop, and picking up and buying it. And I don't know why I did that. Maybe something about the cover art, or just the fact that it was a graphic novel, written by a woman, because I think women are definitely underrepresented in the sort of comic book, graphic novel sort of space. So maybe, yeah, these are the things that excited me. And also reading about a new culture that I didn't know about before. That actually reminds me, I have read several books through this lens of wanting to read a book set in a country where I have not read any book set in that country before, or by an author of a nationality that I have. So, for example, I read, listened to the audiobook of Trevor Noah's, forgetting what the title is, but it's about his um childhood in South Africa. First book that I ever read that was set in South Africa. Fantastic book, hilarious, very insightful about like the human condition. Then I picked up Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly or not, but picked up her books because again, that's a different perspective from a different part of the world where I haven't read. So that's one way. Um, but I think a lot of it nowadays is sort of recommendations, and whenever I find a recommendation somewhere, it goes on my Goodreads list, and every now and then when I'm looking for something new, I go to Goodreads, sort by the average rating, and choose like the top five, see what I'm feeling excited about. I'm also part of a book club in New York, which is where I live now. So some books come from that. Like we have a monthly poll where we all vote for what books we want to read. So there are books that I've read, which I probably wouldn't have picked up, just by my own discovery process. But I loved. One of them is The Sympathizer, which again, it was like very different perspective that I hadn't read before. This is about Vietnam War soldier. He was a North Vietnam soldier, so on the communist side, who was a spy for the South Vietnam, who was a spy in the South Vietnam army. So, and then he comes to the US and sort of how he deals with being an immigrant here, who is pretending to be South Vietnamese, on the American side, but is actually at his heart, he's a communist and on the North Vietnam side. Super interesting. And I don't think I would have picked it up by myself, but it was a book club pick, and I read it, loved it, thought about it a lot. So yeah, lots of different places where books come from.
Yeah, I love those ideas. I think book clubs are again great ways to do it, but I think Goodreads is also underrated as a platform to really discover books. It's so much fun, and it's one of those social media platforms you don't feel guilty about, spending a
Oh
little
yeah,
more time on in some way. But yeah, and I going back to your point about reading countries, I mean books from different countries. There's another friend that is part of this platform called Storygraph, which is similar to Goodreads, but I think they do this yearly challenge where for each month of the year they have to read a particular author from a particular country, and I think it's something that Storygraph does has been doing for the last think 2 or 3 years, and they actually list out all the books from that country that you can choose from. So I think that's a really
yeah.
fun way to expand your reading horizon, because there are so many worldviews you encompass or explore when you pick up a book that is not from your immediate sort of cultural,
Absolutely.
political,
And
or
I think
historical.
another reason to do that is because if you go through like lists of classics, or like you'll find these lists online, like 100 books you should read before you die. You won't find these because they're just, given the way the world has developed, like voices from outside the like Anglosphere
Yes.
are kind of not really given the same due that voices of English speaking countries authors are. So yeah, it's good to step out of those lists, I think.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'd love to talk about your wonderful Substack, Amrita. I've that's how we connected with each other, learning to be happy, which I think is such a nice name. I mean, it's something
Thank
we're
you.
all trying to do right now. In this
Yeah.
global sort of political, historical time. I think just a little bit of happiness is what we're all sort of looking for in everything we do. But, you know, I, I wanted to talk about your journey as a writer, like for you at an individual level, what does writing sort of mean to you, and why? Um, I'm curious if you wrote before you started the blog, and what did you like writing about, growing up, and how did that lead to the blog? And maybe you could tell me about a
Mm.
couple of pieces that you have written for the blog that you were really proud of. Now, maybe you can tell us a little more about.
Yeah, so I think I have to again credit my parents and the privilege that comes from them being my parents. When I was around 7 or 8 years old, they gifted me a giant journal. Okay, like it's like a fat book. I still have it and it's still not full. And they just said that here's a nice looking notebook. my dad loves stationery. Like you give him a beautiful notebook and a beautiful pen, he's very happy. So kind of from there, I was also like, oh wow, okay, this is a nice looking notebook. Now I have to write things in it, and I started writing like I was writing like diary entries. I think it was inspired by Anne Frank a little bit. I had read some abridged children's version of Anne Frank, and I thought, okay, I have to write a diary because, like, oh, also, I don't want to sound all hoity-toity. I also read lots of little girls American fiction where the girls would write diaries. Like, I remember there's this book called Pink Pages or something. Basically, like, I'm trying to say that I wasn't reading like great literature as a child. Like Anne Frank's diary is very up there, but I was reading all kinds of things. But diary writing was huge. And so, yeah, I like still find it really fun to go back and read some of the things I've written when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. Like these really ridiculous poems and little like just, like clips, politics of the like kids in my class. Like, this boy said this to that girl and like she was, can you believe it? Like, funny stuff like that. And then there was a book series called The Amazing Days of Abby Hayes, which some friends and I used to read this, used to get it from the same library. And we decided that we are going to write a book in that series. And so we decided there would be 4 of us, 12 chapters, 3 chapters each. You have to write it. And we discussed a little bit like what is going to be the story. And then we just wrote something. And I can't believe, like, the audacity, like as an adult, you don't just do that. You don't get together with a group of friends and say, okay, we're going to write a storybook with 12 chapters, three chapters each. Just that's it. Not much discussion. Do it. And I have my 3 chapters that I wrote, and it's, it's like, it's little silly stuff, but I feel like those are really the places where I felt like, okay, I love this thing. Like whatever is happening when I'm writing something, like just making up stuff, making up words, it gives me a lot of joy. So yeah, that seed was always there that I want to write. What do I want to write? I don't know. I didn't really have, anything in mind. I knew that I like writing fiction, like I like making up stuff. I used to write like short stories. In school, sometimes they would make you write essays in class, which I also really liked doing. And I think in fifth standard, we had this English textbook called A Magic Place, which had the most beautiful stories and poems from all over the world, Indian authors, non-Indian authors, and that had a special place in my heart. Like it was, I think, the first time I read a poem that was not like rhyming and didn't even have any like structure. It was just free verse, and I was so fascinated. Like this is something that you can do. And then like shortly after, I found like poems in my journal. Heavy stuff, like I'm writing about, oh, my parents had a fight and that makes me feel really bad, and I've written a poem about it. And so yeah, I think reading and having people encourage you that here's a notebook where like you can write, like they give it some importance, that is huge. So I felt like I had the right RIGHT to write. That it's not like, oh, writing is only reserved for like whatever they tell you to write in school. Like it was encouraged that no, just write whatever you want. And so yeah, that stayed with me throughout. And then I think the place that it stopped is because writing didn't feel like a career that is like a sustainable career, right? So I couldn't sort of do that as my job. Like that was very much understood. And also I was also very interested in science, and I wanted to do that, like, go to college and learn it and everything. But during college and PhD, the just writing for fun, it was put on hold. And I missed it a lot. Like I used to journal, I used to write a diary, but I was not writing any fiction, poems, or anything. And I found myself missing it so much. And then towards I think in COVID, this was in the 4th or 5th year of my PhD. My husband and I started listening to this podcast, The Seen and the Unseen, by Amit Verma, and we like loved his podcast. So that's a side thing. We kept listening and all that. But every now and then he would have this ad about a writing course that he does. And at some point, I was like, okay, I've listened to this ad enough. I've thought about it enough. I'm just going to do this. I love writing. I know that I love writing. I haven't done it for a long time, but I want to do it. Let me just do the course, because every time I hear the ad, I feel a little excitement, and there are all kinds of reasons not to do it, but forget about those. Let's do it. So I did that in April 2023. And then I was hooked. He had us write a couple of pieces for the course itself. I had so much fun writing those pieces. I think I wrote some like insane story about a woman who gets amnesia, like Gajini type. She gets some blow on her head, forgets about her life, and then someone tries to hoodwink her, and then she finds her way out of that. Something. But it was just so much fun writing that I decided, okay, now this is going to happen. It seems like in 2023, if you want to write, the way to do it is to just have a Substack and write whatever you want, and put it out there, rather than trying to go to the traditional routes of like publish in magazines or newspapers or whatever. So yeah, that's how it started, and I had some like long list of topics that I want to write about initially. I thought initially that this should be a popular science blog. Like if it's not fiction, then what am I good at? It's science, so I should write about science. And for a long time, I thought like I should not write about other things, because like how can I'm not an expert. Like I think one of the pieces I wrote, which I was very, very proud of, was about gratitude journaling, because that's something that I learned from a therapist. It like really helped me, changed my life in many ways. So, but I hesitated to write that for a while, because I thought, I'm not an expert in this. I can write about science, but I should not write about this. And eventually, I think so there's some types of writing which it just comes out of you. It's, you really want to say these things. The thoughts have been churning in your head for a long time, and it almost like writes itself. Like you open a blank page and the sentences start coming out, and then you do editing and all afterwards, but the core feeling is there. And and I was very nervous, because in that piece I had written that I was depressed at some point, and this helped me get out of my depression. And I was worried that what if I apply for a job and a prospective employer reads this and they say, oh, she had depression, so we can't employ her. Like, the fears of being vulnerable on the internet. And then the same writing group. So the course that Amit runs, there's also a community of all the people who have done that course. So it's an extremely supportive community. So I just sent my piece to that community and I said, these are my concerns. What do you guys think? And they were so supportive. They said, we love it and you must put it out there. And someone said that if you are applying for jobs that are related to writing, then you will get it if you put this piece out there. And I just felt so, supported and, encouraged in that moment. Then I just closed my eyes and put it out there. And that was just the beginning. Then I started writing about all kinds of things that I feel and that I don't necessarily know, because I'm not an expert. But this is how I feel about the world. And that opened up like just a different type of writing that I hadn't done so far. And I still do write popular science pieces sometimes, and especially I think another one that I'm very proud of is a piece that I co-wrote with my husband. He's also he's a machine learning researcher, so we both have like very strong views about why the world needs to use this. Like people need to be aware of scientific thinking and use that more, and like why it makes sense to believe in science. Why do we believe in science personally? So it's called Brick by Brick, an examination of our belief in science. And we spend a lot of time on it, trying to be really precise in articulating that why do we believe something like Newton's laws? Like do we have proof of it? Like have we seen it with our eyes? No, for a lot of these things, right? Like do I know that water is H2O? I don't really know. I have not done the experiments myself, but I believe it. And there's solid reasons for that. It's different from, say, someone's belief in like a religious theory. I'm not saying that people should not believe in religion. I'm just saying that it's different ways at which you arrive at these belief systems. So that, yeah, I think that was another article that I feel good about. Yeah, and these days the writing is it's I love it. It gives me so much happiness. It's the best part of my week when I'm able to sit down and write. And I'm not going to say that it's easy. Like, it's still a struggle sometimes. I have to tell myself that, okay, this topic, it has been sitting in the drafts for too long. Let's work on it. And then I read it and I'm like, yeah, this is terrible. I don't feel like doing this. But then you sort of, like, there's a push and pull, like you force yourself a little bit. Some of it comes easily because it's enjoyable. And I think I hope to never stop writing and just keep doing this because it brings me a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, and I think in the process you've brought a lot of joy to people reading it as well, Amrita. Like in preparing for this
That's so
interview,
kind.
I was just making a list of all the topics you've written about, and it's quite overwhelming for someone that also writes. It's like you've written about rainbows, which was one of your first piece, to loving
Yeah.
poetry, to thinking slowly, to doom scrolling, how to habit, turning 30, violent temper, music lyrics, vacationing in India, Navratri, your beliefs in science, gratitude journaling, and so on and so forth. And I will be including a link to the archives of the newsletter, which is something I highly recommend you do. And I'm sure you may know Amrita directly or indirectly if you're listening to this, or you may be a listener of the podcast. Also, will link Amit Verma's podcast. I'm a huge fan, and it's one of the reasons I started this podcast as well. Amazing work. I definitely think he's one of the best podcasters around, and it's long form, but uh, 400 plus episodes now. So just a shout out to him. And I agree that writing ad, because he doesn't do too many of the outside ads, the writing ad just
Mm-hmm.
kept coming up in those 4 hour sessions, and you're like, this must be some really important writing course. So very important, like very often I'm like, let's just do it because I've listened to it at least 30 or 40 times now. So yeah, that's
Yeah, you
definitely
should do
connected.
it. I highly recommend it. It's a great course, and the community at the end is like, priceless.
Interesting. Yeah, that's definitely something I should consider. Just to respect time, Amrita, I'm looking at what we have here. Sorry. Okay. I wanted to, maybe delve into a couple of the pieces. I particularly enjoyed your piece, Lost in Translation, where you had two
Mm.
parts to it, I think, and you spoke about lyrics, music lyrics, and I'm just curious about your relationship to music, and particularly music from the Hindi film industry, which you wrote about so eloquently in those pieces. So, how did you? I'm curious about craft, and your craft, especially in terms of what you've learned from the course, but also how you think and ideate a piece and then bring it to life. So, where did that piece come from, and what were you really writing about, and what were you trying to communicate, and what was the eventual outcome for that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think that piece I wanted to write because when I started writing, I started appreciating good writing in a totally different way than I had before. Right. So if someone is able to make me feel some emotion by through some words, and especially with very few words, then I would like my ears would perk up and I would be like, oh, how did they do that? And like start thinking about that. And so that happened with Hindi film lyrics in a way that I never really, paid attention to Hindi film lyrics growing up. Like, sure, I loved the music. I've always, loved music. Again, comes from, I don't know, family, like just, yeah, generally love music. But the lyrics specifically, I hadn't realized how much depth of emotion some of these Hindi film lyricists have managed to pack in like 5 words, 3 words, 10 words. So that it made me feel so, I was so amazed that I decided, okay, I have to write about this, because if I didn't know about it, then probably people are also not thinking about it. And let's just like indulge in enjoying these lyrics. And I thought that a good way to do it, especially because my blog is mostly in English, I know that many of my readers don't speak Hindi. So I thought that a good way to explore how those lyrics are being written, how they're working, why they are working to convey that emotion, is to do this translation exercise. So I picked, 4 or 5 Hindi songs, and specifically like parts of those songs for which I really love the lyrics, and I gave myself a challenge that translate them to English. And it's very hard. So I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, in Hindi, the word order is much more flexible, right? So in English, we can, when we have a sentence like, I ate food, that is the only word order. Food ate I is not allowed. Food I ate means something else. Ate I food, not allowed. So whereas in Hindi, मैंने खाना खाया, खाना मैंने खाया, these mean the same thing. And so the word order flexibility in Hindi, I think, gives you a lot of poetic license. Like the way you can just arrange words in a song, you can have lyrics. You can have rhyming more easily because of this flexibility. You can, the rhythm becomes more malleable. Like you can put words in certain places for the rhythm, and it doesn't have to be grammatically, or rather, it is grammatically correct, even though you arrange it in different ways. So I started appreciating these things because I was trying to translate it, and it's not easy. And so that's why the title of the post, Lost in Translation, because I think that in translating to English, you necessarily lose some of the meaning. I mean, there are some words which I think you don't have direct translations, but also there are emotions that it's just hard to convey in a different language. And that's kind of fascinating to me. So, yeah, that's why I did that. And then after doing that, I picked 5 songs and I did it. And it took a lot of time because I would constantly, I would listen to those songs again and again, try to sort of really nail down what is the feeling here and how to put that feeling in few words in English, and think about it for a long time, and then like try out some. I would write some few lines in a notebook, then not like it, and at some point I would hit upon, oh, maybe I can use like this word and abandon this shade of the meaning in order to bring out this other shade of the meaning better. So you also, I think, when you're translating, you have to be okay with giving up, not conveying the full 100% meaning. But if you can convey 80% of the meaning better, then you go for that. So yeah, I was doing all those things. And so 5 was enough. It already took long enough. But I love so many songs, right? So then I had to do a part 2. And I was like, okay, here are all these other songs also, which have like just beautiful lyrics. And let me try to translate them again. So yeah, and that was one piece you talked about.
I mean, the Lost in Translation piece, Amrita, had 2 parts, and I know that was, and you have spoken about a couple of your other pieces, like Brick by Brick. I know it was, so, but one thing I just wanted to, ask you, and I think I'll do disservice to the audience of this podcast because when you were speaking about music lyrics, I just started thinking like, and um, in terms of consuming art, right, or like engaging with art or creating art, right? As a neuroscientist, when you s- there was someone, and I don't think this is accurate, and which is why I wanted to ask you, like, is there some sort of neural sort of system where when we look at something that we, for instance, you're reading a book or you're watching a movie and you feel something emotionally, um, you're almost feeling the same things that the character's feeling, and mentally processing it in the same way, even though you are not experiencing it like the character's experiencing it. Is there some sort of like basis to that claim, or is that inaccurate?
I
Like
think,
the whole mirror neuron thing, is that
hmm,
even real and or true?
yeah. So yeah, this is V.S. Ramachandran, I think, popularized the concept of mirror neurons. So yeah, he has a bunch of research papers on them. There are many effects that you can demonstrate which indicate that there are neurons that have those properties of mirror neurons, where you see something happening to someone and you experience what they would be experiencing. So I think that definitely exists. You can demonstrate it in the lab, with experiments pretty clearly. I don't know, there's replication problem with some of these, especially like psychology studies, and I would not like to state with confidence that those studies are robust because I
Yeah.
don't know if they've been replicated.
Yeah.
But I think the concept itself is true. And yes, you do. There's activity that happens in your brain when you see someone in front of you experiencing an emotion, or you read about someone experiencing an emotion. And that activity is not exactly the same, but is similar to the activity that happens when you experience the emotion yourself.
Wow.
And I think we should remember that these are correlational studies, right? So the way that we do studies, especially, human studies, and a lot of this is from fMRI. So there are limitations of that method as well. Basically, what's happening is a person is put under an fMRI scanner, and then they read something, or they listen to some music, or they watch a movie, and so they're asked what are they feeling, and at the same time their brain activity is being recorded. So the statement you can make is, when a person says they are feeling happy, this is the brain activity pattern that happens. And I think it's very intuitive to say that, okay, the brain activity causes the happiness, but we
Yeah.
should be careful whenever we go from correlation to causation.
Fair.
So yeah,
Yeah.
yes, I will say that you can show that the brain activity that happens when you are feeling an emotion and when you see someone else feeling an emotion, there is a overlap or similarity. But does that mean that I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
want to
I
make
get.
it more interpretation.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you can't generalize what you're saying, and I think the point about it being a correlation rather than causation is so important. It's easy to make those assumptions and jump to those conclusions, but some of it is just your own bias, like growing to a point where maybe it doesn't necessarily have to go to.
No,
But
and
that's
I think
interesting.
humans have this strong desire to see causation, which makes sense. Like evolutionarily, if you see a lion and then your friend is eaten,
Yeah,
you should make that causal connection that lion ate friend, even
yeah,
though you may not have actually seen that happening. So there's a very good reason why humans like to jump to conclusions and infer causality from sparse data. But we shouldn't do that when it comes to like scientific claims.
for sure.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
like from your perspective as a neuroscientist, again, it's just an open-ended question, and you can tell me if the question is even wrong, Amrita. But like from an evolutionary perspective, why do you think humans create art? Like, is there like a immediate benefit to it? Because if you look at it from a very scientific lens, it just seems like not the most productive use of your time,
Hmm.
or I don't know. I'm just curious. What do you think? Because you create art as
Yeah.
well, and
No, what a great question. And I think there's no easy answers to this, or at least we don't yet have any good answers. I've thought about this myself, and one thing in particular I've been very curious about is, why do we dance? Um, you know, because I think for art, like especially visual art, you can make the argument that um, it is useful to convey information. So you can imagine like hunter-gatherers, conveying some information about like natural resources and where this can be found or that can be found through like pictograms in their cave paintings and all, and that slowly evolving with cultural evolution into more and more complex stuff. So you can make some arguments, and I feel like one thing that you really is difficult to make a good evolutionary argument for is dancing, because
mm,
you're kind of expending energy to do some physical activity which is not increasing your chances of survival or your reproduction.
yeah,
And
I mean,
even music, you can make an argument. Like there are people who say that it's a more efficient way to communicate some signals, like if you have two tribes or like parts of a tribe which are split over some distance and they're trying to coordinate in hunting, then they can use drums to like convey some information over a long distance of time. I've read some arguments like this. But dancing, I have not read anything, and it's something that I'm very curious about. And it's sitting in, there's a list of topics that I want to write about. One of them is why do humans dance?
Yeah,
So,
I think
yeah,
that would be a good Substack.
fine. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, but the dance thing I think is so fascinating, and I hope you do explore that in one of your future pieces, Amrita. And I think it's interesting how you're able to dip your feet in so many different worlds. This world of science, because on your the about section of your Substack, you do mention that you write about topics at the intersection of popular science, mental health. I'm not remembering, but yeah, I think I like how you're able to bring these worlds together, and throw light on them from so many different angles, because um, I I I have a strong belief that we often, as adults, put ourselves in these categories. I practice this particular profession, so I can't explore the arts or I can't explore science. I truly believe science and the arts are for everyone. Just because you don't have an educational background in that space, it doesn't mean you don't have a right to engage with the beauty and the importance of a particular creation. And I think what artists do and what scientists do are creative in their own capacities. They're just in different domains, and I find that intersection, like I know Richard Feynman, for instance, was someone that really appreciated the arts and wrote about it actively. And again, I'm not trying to look at a particular individual, but I feel like they're just ways for humans to make sense of their existence in this sort of space that we're sort of existing in together in. So yeah, in terms of questions, anything else that you'd like to talk about, Amrita? I mean, I feel like we've covered most of the things that we spoke about. So any apart from the seen and unseen, or any other podcast recommendations, or any other um, musicians that you've listened to that you highly, we can end on that, podcast and music
Okay.
recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, I will recommend the Hindi podcast Puliyabazi. It's three people that they just talk about stuff in Hindi. And something that I've been trying to do is to improve my Hindi and Marathi, because I think just given how much benefit there was to being good at English, unfortunately, that is the way my languages proceeded, and now I'm so much more comfortable in English than in Hindi or Marathi. It makes me very sad. So I listen to Puliyabazi, and it helps with Hindi a lot. But also, it's just a fascinating podcast. They talk about economics, politics, all sort of focused on India, geopolitics. Really interesting topics. Very good debates and discussions between the podcast hosts. Highly recommend. And music. So I think I don't know. Oh my gosh, it's like such a
Maybe
huge
a film that's music you really like, like a Bollywood film.
film. Bollywood. I mean, I think easy answer is Rahman. Like, most of his music I love. Um, there's a Marathi film I'll recommend whose music I like a lot. And the name, what's the name?
You can share it with me. I'll include it in the
Okay, I'll
show
share it.
notes. Amrita.
Yeah, I love the songs of that Sairat. Yeah, they made a Hindi version also of it. And
Yeah.
if you listen to the Hindi versions of the Sairat songs, then I can't be your friend. So don't come to me with that. But the Marathi ones, I love those songs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you also work for an organization that aims to improve the governance of
Mhm.
Indian states, and that's something you're
Yeah.
doing voluntarily. So if you could briefly talk about that, that
Sure,
would be
yeah. So this is also something that I found through the seen and unseen. I think Amit Verma's just like outsized influence. If one person had to have an influence on my life, he's had like too much influence. But so he did a couple of episodes with Karthik Muralidharan, who is an economics professor in the US, but he runs this organization in India, Center for Effective Governance of Indian States. And the goal is basically, so they have partnerships with various state governments in India. And the goal is to improve how effectively those governments are able to deliver their goals. So, we're not really arguing about what the goal of the government should be, although I think that's important to think about. But okay, given that the government has certain goals, like they want to, for example, provide primary education, right? The status of primary education in India is abysmal. So, what are the various steps that need to be taken to fix those things? Really fix them in not just in a way that the metrics show up well, but that the children in the classrooms actually are able to read and do basic math. So I think he's very good at focusing on the real outcomes and not inputs. Like, we're not trying to increase the number of schools, we're trying to improve whether the children can read or not, like very concrete outcome based work. And so when I heard his episodes of The Seen and the Unseen, I was very inspired. I decided, like, if there's any way that I can like contribute to this mission, then I will do it. So I just reached out to I cold messaged on LinkedIn someone from CEGIS, and I just said, like, hey, I have a PhD in neuroscience. It has nothing to do with what you guys do, but I can do some coding, I can do statistics. Like, is there anything that I can help you with? And they said yes. And so since then, I've been doing some, projects for them that require some programming, some statistics. So, for example, I've been trying to build a model of errors in administrative data. So, the administrative data that the government collects about various things, where are errors coming from? How can we improve the quality of the data by building a good statistical model of why that data is inaccurate in the first place? And it's been great. I feel like it's very satisfying to me because I'm using the skills that I have gained in academic science, but applying them to something where there's a lot more direct impact on the lives of people in the world today. And especially, obviously I care about India and, helping Indian kids. So the satisfaction of that impact is, I think, it's very important for me, and it's become more almost than the satisfaction of like doing good science, because I feel like science obviously has an impact, like, it has a huge impact, but uh, the the proportion of scientific work that actually has an impact is small. So when you're an individual doing a scientific project, it's kind of high risk, high reward. Like, you might have a huge impact, but in all likelihood, you won't have any impact at all. So yeah, it's a little like when you're getting into science, that's something that you should know, and it's difficult to deal with sometimes. So this is a
Yeah.
way where I find I'm able to use my skills and feel like at least there's a potential for impact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's amazing. I'm really excited because I feel like this can be an interesting archive of your thinking at this point of time, because I feel like there are so many things you're
yeah,
exploring right now, and I'm
yeah,
hopeful that you're able to apply those skills in so many different areas, because there are so many transferable skills. But for someone starting off their journey on this scientific path, listening to this, I feel like you've also thrown light on, the joys, but also the challenges in a very vulnerable, honest, and transparent way. And I'm glad we got to speak about writing. And for the listeners tuning in, please do subscribe and explore to start off with some of Amrita's writing on her blog, which will all be in the show notes. And yeah, on that note, we come to an end of this episode of Learning Stories.
thank you
Thanks.
so much, Abhishek. That was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Amrita. I think it was more you than me. I was just listening to your stories, and I think 1 hour is too less to, condense all your life experience. But I feel like we spoke about a few things, and I hope we get to do this again in the future. Maybe about your work in
Yeah,
policy going down, the line.
yeah,
So
would be happy to talk more about that.
amazing. And for the listeners tuning in, stay tuned for more such episodes. Again, the objective of this podcast is to create a kinder and more empathetic version of the internet where we hold space for each other. And That's what I hope I did with this episode for Amrita. And until next time, keep learning.